Welcome to the Taking a Breath podcast with Parker Mays.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to this week's episode of the Taking a Breath podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm excited to get back into, as I mentioned last week, I got an awesome lineup for the next couple of weeks, all in terms of like marketing, sales, business development. So if you're in that space, join us for the next 3 to 4 weeks. And today I'm kicking it off with Kate Dramis. She's a conversion copywriting expert. So for those of you in website development and sales, you are in the right place. She helps coaches, course creators, service providers get heard online through irresistible messaging and copy that converts. So for those of you who may be in entrepreneurship and business development, all of these things, this is going to be a really exciting conversation today. And Kate, I'm so excited to welcome you. So welcome to Taking a Breath, and would love to just hear a little bit more about you and how you got into copywriting and ad marketing.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Like most things that I found that I love in life, I kind of accidentally fell into it, to be completely honest with you. So I was a journalism major in school and was really obsessed with a specific marketing agency here in Atlanta, wanted to work with them really badly. And I was actually applying to their PR position because I was like, oh, I could probably do that. Like, that sounds really fun. A lot of my friends were like going into PR. So I was like, okay, sure. And they actually didn't have the position available by the time I actually graduated. And they had a copywriting position. And so they were like, well, you're a journalism major. Don't you want to be a copywriter? And I was like, what's that? Sure. Okay. And that's how I fell into copywriting. And for me, I felt like I found the biggest adulting hack ever. I was like, you mean someone's going to pay me to write? Like, okay, yes, nice. Sign me up.
I love it. Okay. One of the things that you mentioned when we first were talking was that this agency this company that you were applying to work for in Atlanta, it was like multiple months that you wanted to work. I think that you mentioned that you were pursuing like a job there and wanting to work there. And I think a lot of people, when they think of entrepreneurship, they think of these people who could never imagine working for someone else. And I just want to do my own thing and all this. So tell us about this. You were actually pursuing working for someone else for multiple months before then down the road changing and doing your own thing. Tell us more about that.
I was. So I actually never really considered going out on my own and doing my own thing, which is funny because as a kid, like, when you play pretend, I always played pretend work and I was always the CEO. So I'm not really sure how I expected to get, I guess I was just like, I'm just going to go up through the ranks, right? And own a company. So yeah, I found an agency I really, really liked. And it was probably, I went in for an informational interview actually on my birthday in December. I didn't graduate until May. So I like really, really harassed them for a long time and got the job. But there was, the first time someone told me that was even an option to like go out, I was freelancing on the side because, I was making nothing as an entry-level copywriter. My first client told me, he was like, have you ever considered like doing this full time on your own and like actually building a business? And I laughed at him because I was just like, no, that's ridiculous. And it took years for me to be like, oh, wait, this is actually something that I'm really interested in. And I get to create the job I've always dreamed of.
And that first client was someone who was not only a client, but then you mentioned kind of also a mentor and a supporter for you. Tell us more about that relationship and how that person influenced where you are now.
Yeah, he was huge in my first just career development and also my development of my business. He was my first freelance client. He was my first really significant client when I decided to go full time. He was actually the one who increased his project scope with me so that I could leave my corporate job. I had moved into the corporate space at the time. Was always the person giving me advice on, how to write a scope of work, what it looks like to, really raise your rates as a copywriter, what was happening in the industry. And it's funny, I was actually more of an SEO content marketing copywriter at the time. So I ended up moving away from the area that I got into because of him. He was an SEO expert, but his advice was just invaluable. And I was so to this day, grateful that I had someone who kept encouraging me to look outside of what I saw as the only options for myself.
I love that. Did you have, or do you currently have other mentors or peer level kind of influences in your life that help to kind of motivate and push you to the next level?
I do. So my mentor here in Atlanta is actually, she's incredible. She owns her own recruiting agency. So everyone who's been, I mean, I've worked with so many coaches in my space who have been amazing, but my actual like local community who has helped carry this business to where it is today have actually no experience in my space. So my mentor she owns a recruiting agency. She is amazing. She's stellar. And then actually my financial advisor became like she stepped in to be essentially my business advisor. She's also one of my closest friends. And has been instrumental in the growth of my business. And it was really honestly just accidental. I walked into a meeting and was like, I should probably learn a little bit more about finances if I'm going to run a business. Like, what are these taxes I have to pay? This is crazy. And she asked me questions that I was like, oh, I don't know that. But, she works with a lot of business owners. And so she and my analyst at the time were, like instrumental in the growth of my business. They both have like Team Kate hoodies that I created because it was just me. But I've been really fortunate. And I think that's like my biggest piece of advice to people is to find your community. I think it takes a community to build a business. I've never felt, even in the days of not having a team when I was a solopreneur, I never felt alone because I had people around me, and it's people you don't expect, right? Like today, we're lucky enough to be big enough that like we got to work with a lawyer on our contracts. Like my lawyer is like Team Kate all the way. So I'm very fortunate to be surrounded by people who support us.
Okay. And I'm curious, I want to dive into this a little bit because one of the things that you mentioned there was that you have all these people around you, but they're in different spaces. They're not copywriters themselves. And I'm interested in that. So it sounds like the people that are closest to you have different strengths, right? That you're actually leaning on very heavily, which is really important. Do you have other peers that are in the same role or in the same type of situation that you interact and engage with? Or like, do you prefer actually like mostly leaning on people who are outside of the space?
I definitely do. So I definitely have a lot of peers and like, business besties that I've met who are in the space, either in the coaching side of the business, or more recently, I've been more intentional about connecting with more copywriters, especially as we went into an agency model, because, I woke up one day and was like, let's be an agency. So it's been helpful to talk to other copywriters and be like, how did you do this? Or why did you not do this? Right. So I've definitely been more intentional about that. I would say when it comes to the moments where I'm like, I need like overarching business advice, that tends to be people that I lean on outside of the industry because I'm surrounded by our industry all the time. Right. And so when I'm really hitting a brick wall, that's usually an indication for me that it's time for me to call someone who's like not on Instagram all day doing what we do.
Right. Did you find when you're first getting into the space, and even now, that those people who you're meeting in the space, they're competitors, quote unquote, but they're also kind of peers and people that you're learning from and kind of, mutually benefiting from each other's experience? What's your take on that in terms of competitor versus peer in the marketing space?
Never see anybody as a competitor. It's so funny you ask this. We're building out some internal workflows in our business. And one of our workflows that we build out is when we can't help someone, we have a list of copywriters we send them to. Nice. And I think that is one of the things that's lacking, specifically in the copywriting space, is there seems to be this energy of competition. I've been really lucky to connect with copywriters who don't feel that way, because I don't feel that way. Like I think we do ourselves a disservice when we don't connect with other people who do what we do, because we limit our growth. And I also think it's an element of scarcity mindset, right? I think that if you're flourishing as a copywriter, that I can't flourish as a copywriter, which just simply isn't true.
Right. I love that. And that abundance mindset of, hey, there are resources out there. There are people out there. I love that. And it's awesome that you're promoting that really heavily and living it. I'm curious. So I know you started out as a solopreneur. Do you have kind of a team behind you now that you've kind of scaled? And as you've built and scaled just in general, how has that looked? I mean, were there any things that that are coming up in terms of your leadership that you're like, oh, I really need to work on this side of it or this piece of it? Just tell us a little bit more about that scaling side of things.
So I do have a team. They're incredible. I have 3 people on my team. And I think that the biggest adjustment for me was actually bringing on another copywriter. So there was, a long period of time that I was like, oh no, only I can write the copy because like I am the copywriter and people come to me for me to write the copy. And I actually brought on our copywriter, which was the best decision I've ever made, to help with some of our copy and to help coach in our copywriting programs. And so I, took her through my methodology and like basically as if I'm training another entrepreneur on how to write copy. And she now is like our primary copywriter on most of our agency accounts. So I run strategy and messaging. And so that's been huge. And so I think that my biggest lesson in that is like learning to let go of control.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't do all of the things. And it was a very hard shift for me. And I still find myself doing it. Like, my admin will be like, hey, that's not your job. And I'm like, got it. Sorry.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think for you, it was a technical skill versus like a general like product, right? You're actually selling like your skill and your thing. So I'm curious as well, when you're training her or this, I don't know her or him, but the additional copywriter that you bring on and everything like that, are you saying, hey, here's your personality and your style to that person, kind of adding their thing into it? Or was it more like, hey, this is kind of how I've been doing it and teaching them tips and tricks that way? Like in copywriting, is it personality or is it just like, here's how the industry like does things?
So I would say it's a little bit of both. So I've taken what I've learned in the industry and I've developed my own methodology.
Okay.
And so we approach copy through a specific methodology that I teach my students. So if you're writing with me, you're following that methodology. Right. Now, granted, you might have your own style, but really at the end of the day, we're matching a client's style. So our personality doesn't have anything to do with it. Which is really fun actually, because it's really funny to like watch a copywriter. I'm used to doing it. So I'm not used to like, reviewing it, but there'll be times that I'll read something that my copywriter writes and I'm like, who wrote it? Like, because it's so spot on. Like she will write and our clients will say it like, you do me better than I do me. And she is so good at that. So it's definitely leaning into a copywriter's strengths, I think. So that's one of her areas that she absolutely thrives in, but there definitely is a tactical methodology that we follow that I've created that I train her on.
And when you were looking for someone to build out and to scale with, what were you looking for in her? Was it a specific set of things? Was there anything, technical versus personality that you were looking for? Just curious to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I'm very much a personality and values-based hirer. I'm kind of the mindset that unless I'm hiring you for a very specific and very technical job, you can be trained to do anything. Like I can be trained to do anything. Right. So for me, what stuck out to me about Terry when I brought her onto the team is that she had a thirst for continuing to learn about copywriting and a vision for herself and where she wanted her life to go that I was like, yes, 100%, I can get behind this. So that was honestly the most important thing to me, was not, how many sales pages have you written versus blogs, or how, how do you approach headline writing? I want to know, how are you going to show up every day? How are you going to fit in with our team? How are you going to fit in with our culture? How do you fit in with our values? And that's what I hire based on.
I love that. Now, when you were talking about kind of becoming like over now doing strategy and kind of all of these things, you talked about the transition to kind of have to let go of some things like control, let go of a little bit of control. I know that was a big piece of it that we just talked about in terms of bringing on an additional copywriter. When you started looking at strategy and big picture and not being in the details of every single client, what were some changes in your mindset about the bigger industry or the business as a whole?
That's a really great question. I think that for me, it was mostly looking at workflows, honestly. So how can we continue to deliver the best copy possible, but also provide strategic oversight, especially as our industry changes. So our industry is definitely going through a shift right now. Launches are shifting, the way people serve on webinars and challenges, and that whole world is definitely evolving. And so being able to have this oversight and really focus on messaging and strategy, I'm able to look across multiple clients and say, okay, these are the trends I'm seeing.
Okay.
I think that if I were so far in the weeds on every single client, I wouldn't be able to see that.
Right. Yeah. Being a bird's eye view and being able to see everything and keep your eye on where direction is, where the direction's headed is super important. One of the things that you mentioned there briefly in passing, which is perfect segue to my next question, is you mentioned, the industry is constantly changing. There's so much going on. Now, I have my finger on the pulse of student entrepreneurs and student leaders a lot more than probably most people do. But what I see a lot of students that are really like heavy, especially in student entrepreneurship, that are really trying to get into copywriting, that are trying to get into selling, and not in like a as heavy as you are type of way, but just for themselves. Like personal copywriting seems to be the skill that literally everyone needs to have now. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, why is it important? Is it important for everybody to be able to do some level of copywriting for their business, and kind of what's your interpretation of like students trying to get into that space?
Yeah, so that's actually one of our like foundational beliefs about how we approach copywriting. I will not work with a client who comes to our agency and is not launched before. So if it's your first launch, I will send you to our course to learn how to do your own copywriting, because I think it's that important. And I think that my perspective there is that, as a business owner, you are the owner of your voice and your brand's voice. And so if you do not know how to articulate the value of what you have to offer, and you rely solely on a copywriter to do that for you, you're either missing what's actually working because you don't know what's working, or you're completely outsourcing your voice and you're letting someone else shape it entirely. And in the long run, that's going to come back and bite you, because you probably aren't going to be working with that copywriter forever. And then you've had something that's manufactured that's not fully yours. And so I think it's really important, especially for students as they start to dip into the world of entrepreneurship, that you're thinking about, who am I? What do I stand for? What do I do? And how do I get people on board with what I have to offer? Because at the end of the day, a copywriter's job is to make that stronger, but you have to meet them in the middle and give them something to work with.
So for you, the relationship side of sales and client work it sounds like one of the I mean, obviously the technical is the output, but the input is relationship and understanding and values. Is that kind of where your focus is?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And honestly, like just the overall, mission and vision. So I think that I always say that great copywriting starts with great messaging, and great messaging starts with the business owner. You have to know what your message is. And there's ways that people can help you with that, right? Like we help our clients with that, especially if you're coming into one of our courses to learn how to do copywriting. We always focus on messaging, but a lot of that is pulling stuff out of you as the business owner, because that's where the heart of all of this lies.
Right. Yeah. And so now I know that we talked about this briefly when we chatted, but because this audience is kind of younger, I wanted to take a minute here as we're kind of closing to look back and say, like, for you, is there anything that you getting into your first job, your first launch, like all of these things that have kind of taken you to where you are, like, is there anything you would have done differently, or anything that you learned along the way that you're like, wow, I really wish I had known that at 18, 20, 21?
I think that there was a very long stretch of time where I felt like being young in my space was a problem. So I was, the youngest department head at my agency job. I was reminded of it constantly, not always in the best way. And so I developed this, I would even call it like a complex, the feeling like, well, I'm too young to do this, or I'm too young to hold this opinion. And honestly, like that didn't actually matter. Like my age had nothing to do with it, but I brought that mentality into the beginning stages of my entrepreneurship, where I felt like being young in this space was a problem versus being really cool. Like it's actually really cool that you can do so much and your age has nothing to do with it. So I wish that I had listened to the people who told me, that didn't matter, but I let the other voices be louder. And I think I would have ended up where I am no matter what, but I think that caused a lot of self-doubt in myself, as I was going through that process. And so I would just encourage anyone who's like, I want to do this thing, but like, who am I? I'm only this age, to let that go, because that doesn't matter.
Boom. Okay. And everyone who's listening knows my opinion on that, because I am young in the leadership space. I'm young in, a few things that are in my role. So I 100% am on board with that, and everybody there knows it. But we got another voice saying it, which I love. Okay. Quick hot take on AI copywriting. I know this is, I try to kind of bring something quick at the end to ask about that's industry specific. Curious to see, I've seen a lot of ads on AI being the future of copywriting, and it makes the ad for you or whatever. I'm just curious, have you seen anything about it? Do you kind of know what that space and where it's headed? And do you think it will be as effective or effective enough to replace some of the like copywriting, coaching and copywriting space that's existing right now?
So I want to preface my very strong opinion with the fact that I have nothing to back this up other than just my personal feelings. I've seen the ads. I have not gone into the research.
And that's why it's a hot take. I like it.
But I feel like, because of my perspective on copywriting, which is that it starts with the message and the message starts with you, that AI is going to fall short of what you could get when working with an actual human. Is that to say that it won't be somewhat effective? No, of course not. People really like templates. We sell templates, but I have this same perspective on relying on templates. Is they're only going to get you so far until you learn the skills yourself, or you work with someone who has those skills, who's only going to take it to the next level. I don't know that an AI platform is out there researching launch trends and looking into launch strategy, which are all parts of the copywriting. So will it work to some degree? I'm sure it does, and I'm sure it's fine. Do I think that like eventually all copywriters are going to be replaced by like an AI tool? Absolutely not.
Boom. There it is, everybody. Okay, good. And I love asking that because like you're in the industry. I just see an Instagram ad for it. I'm like, well, I'm going to ask her. She's right here in front of me. I love it. Okay. All right. So two things. One, if people like this conversation or are interested in learning copywriting and learning from you maybe right now, where can they go? And specifically, I want to, because it's been a resource for me as well, plug your podcast, share where people can check that out as well. So what's the best place to find you? And then what's your podcast about?
Yeah, so I'm everywhere on the internet at Kate Dramis. KateDramis.com is my website, so you can find all of the things about me. I'm most active, honestly, on my Instagram. It's how I connect with people. So if y'all like this episode and you want to chat, please DM me. Like, I'm a massive extrovert. I will talk to anybody. So come say hi. I'm at Kate Dramis there. And my podcast is called Amplified AF. We're actually on a brief hiatus, but there's tons of content that you could pick up because it's there. And that's really about owning yourself. So owning your authenticity, owning your voice. My role as a copywriter is not just to write nice things. It's to help you own how awesome you are, specifically in the online space. So that's what that podcast is all about.
Boom. So two things. Yes, even though there isn't like new content coming out right now, there's tons of good stuff that I was checking out even before doing this interview. So highly recommend that if you've liked what we've chatted about. And then just in general for young people, that message of owning yourself, living authentically, like knowing and being who you are is so huge. So thank you for putting that message out there, and definitely go check out that. And then you can follow us at Taking a Breath Podcast on Instagram. We put out weekly clips and content. That's where you can kind of see even clips from this episode. So check us out there, and we'll continue putting out new episodes every week. Like I mentioned, the next 2 to 3 weeks are going to be business development, marketing, copywriting as one example, and just general tips to help you be a better leader, entrepreneur, whatever you're working on. So thank you for joining us. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you again next week for another episode.
Thanks for listening to the Taking a Breath podcast with Parker Mays.